As we've been exploring what Paul told us about being more than conquerors, one of the things I've realized is not just this is a great concept, this is not just a great promise, but frankly, this should be one of the foundations of our spiritual life. Welcome to God Powered. Now, as we've gone through this little series, More Than Conquerors, I have to acknowledge one thing I have realized is how inadequate I am to the task of helping you and I realize how important this is. It has really sunk into me that not only is this a foundational truth, frankly, this should be the lens that you and I look at every challenge through. Not because we're amazing, not because we are fabulous, but because of our relationship through Jesus Christ to the living God, we are called, as Paul calls it, to be more than conquerors. So I acknowledge I'm inadequate to the task of helping us fully grasp all of the aspects of what that means for you and I to be more than a conqueror. But what I do, again, realize is this. Every challenge you and I face, great or small, should be seen through that lens, that we are more than conquerors. Not because of us, but because of Him. But we need to cling to, hold firmly to that truth. It's not just a promise, it's not just a principle. It's an absolute foundational truth that we have got to get firmly planted inside of us. Why? We live in a fallen world, and there's challenges, some just as an aspect of living in a fallen world, and some that God will see. God does allow some challenges, and He has a purpose. We'll come to that. But remember, it's always first the spiritual, then the natural. We are natural beings, but we're also spiritual beings. And even though we don't see the spiritual, everything flows from the spiritual to the natural. So the battles we face, the battles we fight, are spiritual in nature primarily, rather than natural. And many times, depending on the challenge, now again, a flat tire is a flat tire. But many of the challenges, if we don't approach them and deal with them from the spiritual side, if we just battle on the natural, we're just frustrating ourselves, okay? One of those, well, I don't want to say foundational, one of those most amazing books of the Bible, I really encourage you to take the time to really explore, is the book of Joshua. And this is the story of God taking His people into all that He had promised them, all their inheritance. And they routinely, now hang on, the living God said He's giving it to us, right? But what do we see? They had to routinely face armies and nations that were mightier, stronger, greater, bigger, badder than they were. They should have never in the natural succeeded. And more importantly, but hang on, God, you said you've given it to us, but they had to battle for the fulfillment of that promise. And while we don't battle in the natural, it's a litmus test, it's an example for us of how we battle in the spiritual for all that He has for us. Psalms tells us that the story of Israel is a lesson in God's ways. We need to understand these are God's ways and we should embrace them. I've said it many times. God has so much more for you and I if we will be willing to commit, if we will be willing to draw close to Him, if we'll be willing to trust Him and allow Him to take us in places that are scary and watch Him do the amazing. And so I want to see that for you and for me. I want to see us become those heroes of the faith. Now, speaking of which, many challenges that come into our life, they're just part of life in a fallen world, and God will carry us through those. But some challenges God allows. Now, let me say, when God allows challenges, what's not happening? Okay, when God allows challenges, and some of them just feel overwhelming, it's not to display His displeasure. It's not for our defeat. See, we have a very real enemy, and while he's been defeated, he can't take our salvation, but if he can discourage us, if he could cause us to feel defeated, he's won. We are ineffective. So we need to realize those challenges are not showing his displeasure in our life. He's not looking for our defeat. But when God allows those challenges, what's happening? And we see this in the heroes of the faith. So often they faced overwhelming trials. Look at Joseph in prison, all that he went through. Why? God was developing the faith and the maturity in him for him to handle all that he had for him. And Joseph was able to say, what was meant for evil, God meant for good to save many a life. See, he realized it wasn't about him, but it was about saving many a life. David, who is now known as the greatest king in history, faced years of persecution, years on the run, even though God had made a promise to him. Why? God allowed that to develop a man who would be a man after God's own heart. So often the challenges, they are about developing our faith, our maturity to handle all that he has for us. Now, along the way, a byproduct, you hear people say, oh, you're being refined. A byproduct is, yes, when we go through these things, yes, there's a refining that happens, but it's the byproduct. It's primarily about building our strength, our faith, our character, our maturity to handle what he has for us. Our God is so faithful. And some challenges, again, are just part of life in a fallen world. And God is at work. God is calling us to be more than a conqueror. And, we love it when a battle is won quickly, but often it's extended. And there's a great promise. Now, Isaiah 43, and this is verse 5, and it's in the Passion Translation. It starts out like this. And God says to you and I am with you now. I am even close to you. So never yield to fear. We need to sometimes remind ourselves of that. That idea that, oh, God is near, sometimes it just becomes cliche. But when we are facing the challenges, when we face things we don't understand, when we struggle and maybe we're not hearing from God, remind myself, I've come to the conclusion just recently, we should talk to ourselves. You hear people, you see somebody talking to themselves, you got to go, oh, you worry. I've come to realize we need to talk to ourselves. We need to say to ourselves, you know what? God is near me right now. He's with me now. He's even close to me right now. And so I'm not going to yield to fear. I am in all things more than a conqueror. Why? We build ourselves up in our most holy faith. So again, I can't do an adequate job of helping you and I understand all the aspects of being more than a conqueror. And I realize that. I hope that in this series that this has challenged you and spoken to you in a way that will help you live at a higher plane. But I realize I don't have the ability, because this is so important, it's so fundamental. But you and I need to become more than conquerors. Why? Remember I talked about the challenges and their purpose? The primary purpose of everything we face, both good and bad, is that He would be glorified.